The council chamber stretched wide and tall, built to accommodate species of all shapes and sizes. Jack Morrison stood in the center of the circular floor, surrounded on all sides by representatives from across the galaxy. Some floated in special containers filled with methane gas. Others sat on platforms adjusted to their specific gravity needs. The largest among them were the Krell reptilian beings who stood nearly 3 meters tall with scales that shimmered under the chamber lights. Jack wore his standard diplomatic uniform, a simple dark blue suit with the Earth insignia on his chest. He kept his hands clasped behind his back and his expression neutral. Around him, dozens of alien voices filled the air with clicks, hisses, and translated speech that came through his earpiece in clear English. Council leader Thrax rose from his elevated platform. The massive Krell commanded attention simply by existing. His claws scraped against the metal podium as he gripped it, and his yellow eyes fixed on Jack with unmistakable hostility. The chamber fell silent. Thrax began to speak. His voice rumbled, like distant thunder amplified throughout the vast space. He declared that the Galactic Council had reached a unanimous decision regarding humanity. The human species had expanded too quickly, claimed too many worlds, and shown too much aggression in their short time among the stars. This could not continue. Jack listened without interrupting. He had learned that many species considered interruption a grave insult. Better to hear the full message before responding. His face showed neither fear nor anger, just careful attention. The ultimatum came next. Humanity had 30 standard cycles to abandon all colonies beyond their home system. All humans must return to Earth and its immediate orbital territories. No exceptions would be granted. The outer colonies, the mining stations, the research outposts, all of them must be evacuated and turned over to Galactic Council authority. Thrax paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he continued. Should humanity refuse this demand or attempt any form of resistance, the Council would respond with overwhelming military force. 3 full armadas had already been positioned around Earth's solar system. They consisted of the finest warships from a dozen species, including the legendary Vrexian battle cruisers that had never lost a major engagement. Ambassador Zilkra, an insectoid being with crystalline wings, added her voice to the declaration. Her species, the Zephoids, controlled vast information networks across the galaxy. She stated that resistance would be futile and result in complete human extinction. The Council had studied human military capabilities and found them primitive compared to established galactic powers. War Master Krell of the Vrexian fleet stood next. His armor gleamed with metals from 40 conquered systems. He spoke bluntly, without diplomatic softening. He said his warriors looked forward to the engagement if humans chose foolishness over wisdom. Earth would fall in hours, not days. Human ships would burn and human colonies would become property of worthier species. Throughout all of this, Jack remained still. His breathing stayed even and calm. Several alien observers noted this with confusion. They expected outrage, desperate pleading, or at least visible signs of stress. Instead, the human ambassador simply stood there, taking in every word with patient attention. When the speeches finally ended, Thrax asked if the human understood the situation. Jack nodded once. Yes, he understood completely. The Council had issued an ultimatum with a deadline of 30 cycles. Comply or face annihilation. Did he have that correct? Thrax confirmed this was accurate. He added that the decision was final and not open to negotiation. Humanity's expansion threatened the stability of civilized space. The Council had tolerated human presence out of courtesy, but that courtesy had limits. Jack asked permission to speak. Thrax granted it with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. The human cleared his throat and asked a simple question. Was the Council absolutely certain this was the path they wished to take? He emphasized the word certain. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably at the phrasing. Zilkra clicked her mandibles in irritation. She asked if the human dared to question the Council's wisdom. Jack replied that he questioned nothing. He merely wanted to confirm that all options had been considered and all consequences understood. Thrax slammed, his fist on the podium. The boom echoed through the chamber. He declared the question insulting. The council had deliberated extensively. They had consulted military experts, historians, and strategic analysts. The decision was sound and would not be reversed based on human protests. Jack accepted this without argument. He requested 48 hours to transmit the ultimatum to his government and prepare a formal response. This was standard diplomatic protocol, and the council could hardly refuse such a basic request. The delegates conferred briefly among themselves. Thrax agreed to the 48-hour extension. However, he warned that the deadline would not be extended beyond that. If Earth's government needed more time to organize their evacuation after accepting the terms, that could be discussed. But the initial response must come within 2 standard days. Jack thanked the council for their time and consideration. He turned to leave, his movements unhurried and composed. As he walked toward the exit, he reached up and tapped a small device attached to his wrist. The gesture looked casual, almost absent-minded. None of the assembled aliens paid it any attention. It seemed like nothing more than a nervous habit. The chamber doors closed behind Jack with a heavy thud. The moment he left, the council chamber erupted in satisfied chatter. Thrax declared the meeting a success. The human had clearly understood the gravity of the situation. Within 2 days, Earth would have no choice but to accept the terms. Zilkra agreed, adding that her intelligence network would monitor human communications carefully. Any sign of military preparation would be met with immediate action. But she doubted humans possessed either the capability or courage to resist. They were a young species, barely a century into space travel. They had no experience with real interstellar warfare. War Master Krell laughed, a harsh grating sound. He said he almost hoped the humans would be foolish enough to fight. His warriors grew bored with extended peacetime. A quick campaign against Earth would provide excellent training for newer crew members. Besides, human worlds were rich in resources that would serve the Vrexian fleet well. Other delegates joined the discussion, already planning how to divide human territories once the evacuation was complete. The agricultural colonies would serve the Tekran collective well. The mining asteroids could be repurposed for Zephoid industrial needs. Even Earth itself might make an interesting study world, a preserved example of a Deathworld species that had reached for the stars but lacked the strength to hold them. Not a single delegate considered the possibility that they had made a serious mistake. Not one of them wondered why the human ambassador had seemed so unnaturally calm. They assumed his composure was either ignorance of the true danger or acceptance of inevitable defeat. They would learn differently soon enough. The small device Jack had tapped on his wrist was not jewelry or a nervous habit. It was an emergency transmission beacon keyed to specific protocols in Earth's military command structure. The moment he pressed it, automated systems across human space had activated. Protocol Omega was now in effect. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you threatened a species that evolved fighting for survival every single day of their existence. Jack Morrison walked back to his ship, his expression finally allowing a small, knowing smile. Council Leader Thrax stared at the holographic display for a long moment. His scaled face showed a mixture of anger and confusion. Finally, he spoke, accusing Jack of presenting false information. No peaceful species maintains such enormous military forces in reserve. The human must be attempting to deceive the Council with fabricated data. Jack asked a simple question in response. Would Thrax prefer independent verification? The ambassador could provide access codes that would allow Council intelligence services to confirm the fleet positions directly. Every ship, every platform, every military installation could be verified through their own sensors and surveillance networks. Zilkra's wings buzzed rapidly, a sign of agitation among her species. She stated that such verification would take time. Hours at minimum, possibly days. The Council could not make decisions based on unconfirmed claims from a species facing extinction. The ambassador agreed that verification would take time. He suggested the Council take that time. There was no need to rush into decisions that could not be reversed. Meanwhile, He would remain available to answer any questions or provide additional information as needed. War-Master Krell stood abruptly, his armor clanking. He declared that, even if the human claims were accurate, it changed nothing. The Galactic Council had superior technology, better trained commanders, and centuries of tactical experience. Human numbers meant little against such advantages. Jack considered this statement carefully before responding. He acknowledged that many Council species possessed advanced technology. However, he wondered if Krell understood what human tactical doctrine actually emphasized. It was not technological superiority. Humans knew they were newcomers to galactic civilization and that others had more refined equipment. Instead, Jack explained, human military philosophy focused on asymmetric warfare, unpredictable tactics, and willingness to accept casualties that other species found unthinkable. Earth's military trained its personnel to function in chaos, to adapt when plans failed, and to continue fighting under conditions that would cause most armies to surrender. He pulled up another display on his tablet. This one showed recordings from human military exercises. Ships performed maneuvers that violated standard engagement protocols, flying closer to each other than safety regulations recommended. Soldiers trained in scenarios involving massive casualties, learning to complete missions even when most of their unit was gone. One recording showed a human boarding exercise. Marines in powered armor cut through a derelict ship, moving with speed and aggression that seemed reckless. They cleared rooms with tactics that prioritized speed over caution, accepting higher risk in exchange for momentum and surprise. Thrax watched the recordings with growing unease. He pointed out that such tactics would result in unnecessary losses. Any competent commander would avoid such waste. Jack nodded in agreement. Yes, those tactics would cause higher casualties. But they would also overwhelm defenders who expected conventional military behavior, the ambassador explained further. Most galactic species valued the lives of their soldiers highly. They retreated when casualties reached certain thresholds. They broke off attacks when resistance proved stronger than anticipated. These were reasonable, rational behaviors based on preserving valuable personnel. Humans calculated differently. They valued their soldiers' lives enormously, but they also understood that sometimes achieving the objective required accepting terrible costs. When the alternative was extinction or slavery, humans would pay prices that other species could not imagine. Zokra asked if Jack was threatening the Council with suicide tactics. The ambassador shook his head firmly. He was not threatening anyone. He was trying to explain why the Council's assumptions about human behavior might be dangerously incorrect. Jack continued his explanation. Earth's history provided thousands of examples. Battles where small forces held against overwhelming odds. Last stands where soldiers chose death over surrender. Sieges where cities refused to yield despite starvation and disease. This pattern repeated across cultures and time periods. It was not that humans wanted to die, Jack clarified. They desperately wanted to live. But their evolutionary history had programmed them with a survival instinct that triggered extreme responses when truly cornered. The ultimatum, with its threat of complete extinction, had triggered exactly that response. Another council member spoke up, a floating creature from the Aquos Federation. It asked whether humanity truly believed they could win against 3 armadas plus the full might of the Galactic Council. The question was genuine, not hostile, Jack answered honestly. Winning was not the only consideration. If forced to fight, humanity would inflict maximum damage regardless of the ultimate outcome. Even if Earth fell, the cost to the Council would be enormous. Fleets would be devastated, economies disrupted, political stability shaken. And that was assuming the conflict remained contained to military targets. Thrax demanded to know what Jack meant by that last statement. The ambassador explained that human desperation could lead to unpredictable actions. If Earth faced certain destruction, who could say what desperate measures might be attempted? Attacks on civilian targets, scorched earth destruction of colonies before abandoning them, or worse. He quickly added that Earth's government strongly opposed such measures, but in a war of extinction, control could break down. Individual commanders might make decisions their leadership would never authorize. History showed that total war brought out both the best and worst in humanity. The council chamber grew very quiet. Delegates began whispering among themselves in their various languages. The initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty and concern. Jack stood patiently in the center, waiting. War Master Krell finally spoke again, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. He asked how many ships humanity could field in total if they mobilized everything. Jack consulted his tablet and provided an estimate. Approximately 8,000 combat vessels of various classes, plus support craft, defense platforms, and auxiliary units. The number caused visible reactions throughout the chamber. Zokra's wings went completely still. Thrax's claws tightened on his podium. Several smaller delegates made sounds of distress in their native languages. Jack pointed out that most of those vessels were relatively small compared to galactic capital ships. Human technology remained inferior in many ways. But quantity had a quality all its own, especially when deployed with aggressive tactics and willingness to accept losses. He also mentioned that the 8,000 number represented current operational vessels. Human industrial capacity could produce additional ships, though that would take time. More importantly, human production facilities were distributed across multiple systems, making them difficult to eliminate with surgical strikes. Thrax asked how long humanity had maintained these forces. Jack explained that the buildup had occurred gradually over decades. As human colonies expanded, defensive requirements grew proportionally. Additionally, Earth's fragmented political history meant that military preparedness was deeply embedded in cultural thinking. The council leader asked why humanity had never mentioned their military strength during diplomatic negotiations. Surely such information would have been relevant. Jack's response was simple: the council had never asked. Diplomatic protocols focused on economic capacity, population, and territory. Military strength was not part of standard disclosure requirements. Furthermore, Jack added, Earth saw no benefit in advertising their capabilities. Appearing weak but peaceful encouraged others to leave them alone. Appearing strong might have invited challenges from species eager to test themselves against a Deathworld civilization. Zokra asked the most important question. If the council withdrew the ultimatum, would humanity demobilize? Would they return to normal operations and diplomatic relations? Jack confirmed that Earth would gladly stand down if the threat was removed. Protocol Omega existed purely for defensive purposes. Once the existential danger passed, human forces would return to normal deployments. Trade could continue. Cultural exchanges could resume. Nothing fundamental needed to change. However, he added carefully, Earth would not demobilize to pre-crisis levels. The Council's ultimatum had revealed the need for stronger defenses. Humanity would maintain larger standing forces going forward. This was non-negotiable. Thrax objected that maintaining such large military forces suggested aggressive intentions. Jack disagreed respectfully. Large defensive forces suggested caution and preparation. Humanity had no territorial ambitions beyond their current colonies. They sought no conquest or expansion into areas claimed by others. The ambassador made a final point. Every species in the galaxy maintained military forces proportional to their threat perception. Earth simply had a higher threat perception than most, shaped by their Deathworld origins and turbulent history. This was not aggression. It was prudence. War Master Krell asked about human casualties in previous conflicts. Jack provided the information. Billions had died in wars throughout human history. Entire civilizations had been destroyed. Yet humanity survived, adapted, and continued forward. That resilience was both their greatest strength and their most concerning characteristic. The Council needed time to process this information. Thrax announced a recess of 12 hours while Council. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan waited in the docking bay when Jack's shuttle arrived. She had been monitoring the council session through official channels, but the actual details remained classified until the ambassador returned. Her face showed the tension she felt. Though she tried to maintain professional composure, Jack stepped off the shuttle with the same calm demeanor he had shown in the council chamber. Kate fell into step beside him as they walked through the corridors of the human diplomatic vessel. She asked the question that had been burning in her mind for the past hour. What had the council decided? Jack summarized the ultimatum as they walked. 30 cycles to evacuate all human colonies beyond Earth's system. 3 armadas already in position. Comply or face extinction. He delivered the information in the same flat, factual tone he might use to describe the weather. Kate stopped walking. She stared at Jack with wide eyes and asked if he was serious. Complete evacuation? That was insane. Millions of humans lived in the outer colonies. Some had been born there and never even visited Earth. The logistics alone would take years, not cycles. Jack nodded in agreement. It was indeed an unreasonable demand. He resumed walking, and Kate hurried to catch up. She asked what Earth's government planned to do. Would they try to negotiate? Could they buy more time? Was there any chance the council might reduce their demands? The ambassador entered his private office and gestured for Kate to close the door. Once they had privacy, his careful composure shifted slightly. He asked if she understood what the wrist device activation meant. Kate's expression changed as realization dawned. Protocol Omega, she whispered the words like they carried physical weight. Jack confirmed it. The moment the Council issued a direct threat to Earth's existence, automatic systems had engaged. Every human military installation, from the inner system to the furthest outpost, had received the activation signal. By now, reserve fleets were already mobilizing. Defense platforms were coming online. Production facilities were shifting to wartime operations. Kate sat down heavily in one of the office chairs. She asked how long until the council realized what was happening. Jack considered the question carefully. He estimated they had perhaps 12 hours before Galactic Intelligence Network started picking up signs of the mobilization. Maybe a bit longer if Earth's communication security held. The lieutenant asked what would happen next. Jack explained that he had 48 hours to deliver Earth's formal response. During that time, human forces would continue positioning themselves. The 3 galactic armadas near Earth were about to find themselves significantly outnumbered, though they did not know it yet. Kate wanted to know if there would be a war. Jack's answer was measured. That depended entirely on the Council's reaction when they learned the truth. If they were wise, they would recognize their mistake and withdraw peacefully. If they were proud and stubborn, the situation could escalate into something terrible. The next several hours passed in careful activity. Jack drafted reports, coordinated with Earth's diplomatic corps, and monitored military updates that came through secured channels. Kate assisted, though she found it difficult to concentrate. The idea that war might break out at any moment made her hands shake whenever she thought about it. Too deeply. 3 cycles after the council meeting, Jack requested a follow-up session. The request surprised the council members, but they agreed. They assumed the human had returned to deliver Earth's acceptance of the ultimatum. Some even prepared speeches welcoming humanity's wise decision. Jack entered the council chamber for the second time. He carried a simple data tablet, the only equipment he brought. The assembled delegates watched him with expressions ranging from satisfaction to curiosity. Thrax called the session to order and asked what message the ambassador brought from Earth. Jack thanked the council for agreeing to meet again. He stated clearly and simply that Earth's government would not be complying with the ultimatum. Humanity would not abandon their colonies. They would not retreat to their home system. The answer was no. The chamber erupted. Dozens of species began shouting, clicking, or transmitting their outrage simultaneously. Thrax roared for silence, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Once order returned, he asked if the human understood what he was saying. Refusal meant war. War meant extinction. Jack acknowledged that he understood the council's position perfectly. However, there appeared to be a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's position. Perhaps he could clarify a few facts that might influence the council's thinking. Zokra's crystalline wings buzzed with irritation. She stated that facts were irrelevant. The council had made their decision based on complete intelligence. Human military capabilities were well documented and insufficient to challenge even one armada. Let alone 3, the ambassador asked politely if the council's intelligence was current. Thrax demanded to know what that question meant. Jack activated his tablet and projected a holographic star map into the center of the chamber. It showed the local sector with Earth at the center and the 3 galactic armadas marked in red. Jack explained that when the council issued their ultimatum, they had triggered certain automatic protocols within human military doctrine. These protocols existed specifically for scenarios involving existential threats to Earth or human colonies. He asked if the council was familiar with the concept of rapid force projection. Several delegates exchanged confused glances. War Master Krell stated that all military forces practiced rapid deployment to some degree. That was basic strategic planning. Jack agreed that this was true. However, human rapid deployment operated on a different scale than most species anticipated. He touched his tablet, and the star map changed. Blue icons began appearing throughout the sector. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Each icon represented a human military vessel. They surrounded the 3 galactic armadas like a closing net. More icons continued appearing as the display updated in real time. The council chamber fell absolutely silent. Delegates stared at the holographic map with expressions of disbelief. Zilkra demanded to know if the display was accurate or some kind of fabrication designed to intimidate them. Jack assured her that every icon represented a verified military asset currently in position or en route. He provided specific details. 17 battle groups had been recalled from Deep Space Patrol and repositioned around Earth. Another 23 groups were maintaining defensive positions around human colonies. 42 destroyer squadrons had deployed to intercept points throughout the sector. Carrier groups, each containing hundreds of fighter craft, had moved into strategic positions. Additionally, Jack continued, every orbital defense platform around human-controlled worlds had activated. The asteroid mining facilities in 6 systems had converted to military production and were currently manufacturing ammunition, replacement parts, and additional defense drones. Colonial militia forces totaling over 2 million personnel had mobilized. Thrax found his voice and accused Jack of lying. No species maintained such massive military reserves while claiming to seek peace. The numbers were impossible. Humanity could not possibly support such a large fleet. Jack's expression remained patient, almost sympathetic. He explained that this was precisely the misunderstanding he had hoped to address. Humanity did seek peace. They preferred cooperation, trade, and cultural exchange. But being peaceful and being helpless were entirely different concepts. He asked the Council to consider human history. Earth was a death world by galactic standards. Humanity evolved in an environment of constant danger. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, and resource competition shaped their development for millions of years. Survival required preparation, adaptability, and overwhelming response to threats. When humans reached space, Jack continued, they brought those survival instincts with them. They built redundant systems, maintained large reserves, and planned for worst-case scenarios. Not because they wanted war, but because they understood that being unprepared invited aggression from others. Zilkra argued that the Council's combined forces still outnumbered the human fleet. Pure mathematics favored the galactic armadas. Surely Jack recognized this basic strategic reality, the ambassador nodded. Numbers mattered, certainly. But they were not the only factor in military calculations. He asked if the Council had considered the qualitative differences between their forces and human forces. The silence that followed suggested they had not. Jack began explaining what it meant to come from a death world. Most Council species evolved on gentle planets with stable climates and relatively few natural dangers. Their military personnel trained in controlled, comfortable environments. Human soldiers trained in conditions that would hospitalize most aliens. Earth's gravity was higher than standard. Its atmosphere contained trace elements that many species found mildly toxic. Temperature variations were extreme. Radiation levels were elevated. Yet humans considered these conditions normal. They could function in environments that other species required special equipment to survive. War Master Krell dismissed this as irrelevant. Space combat did not occur in atmosphere or on planetary surfaces. Ships fought in vacuum, where environmental adaptation meant nothing. Jack agreed that Krell had a valid point regarding ship-to-ship combat. However, Fleet Commander Vex of the First Armada stared at his tactical displays with growing concern. The massive reptilian officer had led successful campaigns across a dozen systems, but nothing in his experience prepared him for what he was witnessing now. Human vessels were everywhere. They had appeared over the past 2 cycles, emerging from deep space routes that galactic intelligence claimed did not exist. Each time Vex's scouts ventured beyond their defensive perimeter, they encountered more human ships in positions that should have been empty space. The human vessels moved strangely. They did not maintain the standard grid formations that allowed efficient communication and mutual support. Instead, they flew in loose groupings that shifted constantly. Patrol patterns changed every few hours, making prediction impossible. Vex sent a priority message to the Galactic Council. His fleet was no longer in a position of dominance. The humans outnumbered his forces 3-1 and continued arriving in greater numbers. He requested immediate reinforcement or permission to withdraw to a more defensible position. The Second Armada reported similar situations. Commander Talric, a veteran of the Zepoid military, described human tactics as chaotic yet somehow coordinated. His scouts had been intercepted repeatedly by human fighters that appeared from unexpected vectors. Several scout ships had been damaged, though not destroyed. Talric noted that human vessels approached much closer than standard engagement protocols recommended. They flew within ranges that his weapons officers considered uncomfortably tight. When challenged, human captains responded with casual greetings rather than formal military identification. One encounter particularly disturbed Talric. A human destroyer had approached his flagship broadcasting music on open channels. The music was loud, aggressive, and filled with sounds Talric's translator could barely process. When asked to cease the transmission, the human captain responded that the music helped his crew stay alert during long patrol shifts. The Third Armada faced different but equally unsettling experiences. War Master Grendix reported that human communications were layered with what appeared to be deliberate misinformation. Ships claimed to be in locations they clearly were not. Captains used informal language that made determining command structure nearly impossible. Additionally, Grendix noted human vessels showed obvious signs of combat damage. Scarred hulls, patched armor, and jury-rigged repairs suggested these were veteran ships with extensive combat experience. This contradicted intelligence reports claiming humanity had engaged in only minor skirmishes since joining galactic civilization. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to review these field reports. Thrax read through the compiled data with mounting alarm. Every Armada commander reported similar observations. Human forces were larger, more experienced, and more unpredictable than any intelligence estimate had suggested. Zilkra's information networks had finally completed their verification of Jack Morrison's claims. The results confirmed everything the human ambassador had stated. 8,000 combat vessels were indeed deployed or in transit. Orbital defense platforms surrounded every human colony. Industrial facilities had shifted to military production. More disturbing was information about human training procedures. Zilkra's analysts had accessed publicly available military records. What they found shocked the council members. Human soldiers trained under conditions that would violate safety regulations. In every council species, one training exercise involved simulated ship breaches where trainees had to function in decompressing compartments. Another required soldiers to fight while being subjected to disorienting lights and sounds. A third involved hand-to-hand combat training that resulted in a 30% injury rate among participants. War Master Krell reviewed these records with professional interest. He admitted, reluctantly, that such training would produce warriors capable of functioning under extreme stress. Most species trained their soldiers in controlled environments with strict safety oversight. Humans deliberately exposed their personnel to chaos and danger during preparation. The Council also received reports about human ship construction. Unlike galactic vessels, which prioritized crew comfort and safety, human warships were built with redundant systems and compartmentalized designs. Ships could continue fighting even after sustaining damage that would disable comparable galactic vessels. One report described a human cruiser that had participated in a pirate suppression operation. The ship had taken severe damage, losing primary power, life support in 3 sections, and most of its sensor arrays. Yet the crew had continued fighting, using backup systems and manual targeting to destroy 2 pirate vessels before retreating for repairs. Such resilience was unknown among Council species. When ships sustained major damage, standard procedure was immediate withdrawal for crew safety. Humans apparently calculated acceptable risk differently. Thrax called for opinions from the assembled delegates. He asked whether the Council should proceed with the ultimatum or seek alternative solutions. The responses revealed deep division. Some delegates argued for immediate military action. The Vrexian representative claimed that delaying only gave humans more time to prepare. Better to strike now, before their mobilization completed? Several others supported this view, insisting that Council authority required follow-through on threats. Other delegates urged caution. The Tekran Collective representative pointed out that even if the Council won the war, the cost would be devastating. Thousands of ships destroyed, millions of casualties, and economic disruption across multiple sectors. Was forcing human evacuation worth such a price? The Aquos Federation representative asked a different question. Why was human expansion considered threatening? Yes, they had claimed many colonies quickly, but they had not encroached on existing territories or violated any treaties. Their growth was aggressive by galactic standards, but not illegal. This observation sparked debate. Zilkra argued that rapid expansion indicated dangerous ambition. Species that grew too quickly tended to become destabilizing influences. Better to contain them early before they became unmanageable. The Sovar Unity representative countered that this reasoning was circular. Humans expanded quickly because they encountered empty systems. Threatening them for occupying unclaimed space seemed unjust. If the Council wanted slower human expansion, they should have claimed those systems themselves. War-Master Krell raised a military perspective. His analysts had studied the tactical data carefully. Human forces demonstrated sophisticated coordination despite their chaotic appearance. They used unconventional tactics that would be difficult to counter with standard battle doctrine. Furthermore, Krell noted human ships carried more ammunition than equivalent galactic vessels. They sacrificed crew quarters and recreational spaces for additional weapon storage. This suggested planning for extended engagements rather than the brief, decisive battles that characterized most galactic conflicts. The discussion continued for hours, revealing the complexity of the situation. The initial unanimous decision to issue an ultimatum was crumbling under the weight of new information. Pride and political considerations competed with practical concerns about the costs of war. During a brief recess, several smaller council members approached each other privately. The Tekran Collective, Sovar Unity, and Aquos Federation representatives agreed that they had been pressured into supporting the ultimatum by larger powers. None of them actually wanted war with humanity. These species maintained profitable trade relationships with human colonies. Cultural exchanges were ongoing and mutually beneficial. The idea of destroying all that over vague concerns about expansion rates seemed increasingly foolish. When the Council reconvened, Thrax made an unusual move. He announced that he wished to meet privately with Ambassador Jack Morrison. This violated standard diplomatic protocol, which required all Council business to occur in open session. However, given the circumstances, he requested special dispensation. The Council voted narrowly to approve the private meeting. Several delegates objected loudly, but the majority recognized that current approaches were not working. Perhaps direct communication between leadership would prove more productive. Jack received the meeting request aboard his ship. Kate asked if it might be a trap. Some species were known to use diplomatic meetings as cover for assassination or kidnapping. The ambassador considered this possibility but ultimately decided the risk was worth taking. He agreed to the private meeting with certain conditions. It would occur in a neutral location, with security personnel from both sides present but not in the room. Both participants would be scanned for weapons. And the meeting would be recorded for later review by both governments. Thrax accepted these terms. The meeting was scheduled for 6 hours later, in a conference facility maintained by the Galactic Council for Sensitive Negotiations. As Jack prepared to attend, he sent a coded message back to Earth. Things were progressing, but the outcome remained uncertain. Kate helped him review talking points and potential compromises. She asked what he would do if Thrax refused to back down. Jack's answer was simple but heavy with implication. Then he would do his job as Earth's representative and return home to be with his family before the war began. The 6 hours passed slowly. Across the sector, human. The conference facility was small compared to the main council chamber. It contained only a simple table, 2 chairs, and monitoring equipment that would record the conversation. Security personnel from both sides had swept the room thoroughly, confirming no weapons or surveillance devices beyond the agreed recording system. Jack arrived first, sitting in the human proportion chair and waiting patiently. His hands rested on the table, relaxed and visible. He had brought no documents or electronic devices. Everything needed for this conversation existed in his mind. Thrax entered moments later. The massive Krell had to duck through the doorway despite its generous height. He settled into his reinforced chair with a heavy thud. For a long moment, the 2 representatives simply looked at each other across the table. The council leader spoke first. He admitted that the council had made errors in judgment regarding humanity. Their intelligence had been incomplete. Their assumptions had been incorrect. The situation was more complex than they had initially understood. Jack acknowledged this statement with a slight nod. He appreciated Thrax's directness. Many diplomats would have spent hours avoiding such admissions. The fact that the council leader started with honesty suggested genuine willingness to find solutions. Thrax asked what humanity truly wanted from the galactic community. Not the official diplomatic statements, but the real goals that motivated human expansion and development. He needed to understand this to recommend a path forward to the council. Jack considered the question carefully before answering. Humanity wanted what most species wanted: security, prosperity, and the opportunity to grow. They wanted their children to have futures filled with possibilities rather than limitations. They wanted to explore, learn, and contribute to galactic civilization, but more fundamentally, Jack continued, humans wanted respect. Not fear, not dominance, but recognition as equals despite their relative youth as a spacefaring species. The ultimatum had felt like dismissal, as if humanity's achievements and rights meant nothing to established powers. Thrax listened without interrupting. When Jack finished, the Krell leader admitted that respect was indeed the core issue. Many council species viewed humans as primitive newcomers who needed guidance and control. This attitude had shaped the decision to issue the ultimatum. The council leader explained his perspective. Humanity had achieved in a century what took most species millennia. This rapid progress made others uncomfortable. It suggested either that humans were exceptional or that established species were less capable than they believed. Neither conclusion sat well with those who had ruled the galaxy for generations. Jack understood this concern. Change always threatened those comfortable with existing arrangements. But he pointed out that human advancement did not diminish others' achievements. The galaxy was vast enough for multiple successful civilizations. Competition need not be destructive. Thrax agreed in principle. However, he noted that some council members genuinely feared human expansion. Not just territorial concerns, but cultural ones. Human entertainment, music, and art were spreading rapidly. Human trade practices were disrupting established markets. Human ideas about individual rights and democratic governance were influencing younger generations on other worlds. This was cultural expansion, Jack acknowledged. But was it really threatening? Ideas spread because people found them valuable. If human culture appealed to others, preventing that exchange seemed both futile and wrong. Free beings should be allowed to choose which ideas they adopted, the council leader made a gesture indicating partial agreement. He asked what humanity would accept as reasonable limitations on their expansion. Some compromise was necessary to satisfy council members, who would not accept complete capitulation. Jack outlined Earth's position. Humanity would not abandon existing colonies. Those worlds were home to millions of people who had built lives there. Forced evacuation was unacceptable. However, Earth would be willing to discuss reasonable timelines for future expansion. Specifically, Jack proposed a moratorium on claiming new systems for 20 standard years. During that time, humanity would consolidate existing territories and establish clear protocols for future growth. This would give the Council time to adjust to human presence while protecting Earth's core interests. Thrax considered this proposal. He asked about military forces. Would humanity reduce their fleet to pre-crisis levels? Jack's answer was firm, no. The ultimatum had demonstrated the need for strong defenses. Earth would maintain substantial military capabilities going forward. The Council leader objected that large human military forces would make other species nervous. Jack countered that those same species maintained their own significant fleets. Why should humanity be held to different standards? Either all species reduced their militaries proportionally, or each maintained whatever forces they deemed necessary for security. Thrax saw the logic, but pointed out political realities. Convincing the Council to accept heavily armed humans would be difficult. He needed something to offer the more hostile delegates. Jack thought about this problem. After a moment, the ambassador proposed transparency measures. Human military deployments could be shared with Council observers. Exercises could include observers from other species. This would demonstrate that human forces existed for defense rather than conquest. Additionally, Jack suggested joint operations against common threats. Pirates, smugglers, and other criminal elements plagued the galaxy. Human forces could participate in Council-sponsored peacekeeping and law enforcement operations. This would build trust while contributing to galactic security. Thrax found these suggestions more palatable. He asked about human colonies that bordered territories claimed by Council species. Several disputes existed over exact boundary definitions. Would humanity negotiate those borders fairly? Jack confirmed that Earth was willing to submit border disputes to neutral arbitration. Humanity claimed no special privileges. They would accept the same legal frameworks that governed other species. Fair treatment was all they requested, nothing more. The Council leader raised the issue of human biological advantages. In ground combat or boarding actions, humans had inherent superiority over most species. This created military imbalance that concerned others. Could this advantage be addressed somehow? Jack responded that biological characteristics could not be changed. However, humans could agree to limitations on certain weapons or tactics in conflicts with less physically capable species. Essentially, rules of engagement that prevented unfair exploitation of Deathworld adaptations. Thrax appreciated this concession. He moved to perhaps the most difficult issue. The ultimatum had been issued publicly. Simply withdrawing it would make the Council appear weak. He needed a way to resolve the situation that allowed both sides to maintain dignity. Jack had anticipated this problem. He proposed a face-saving solution. The Council could announce that, after careful review, they had determined humanity's expansion was within legal parameters. The ultimatum had been based on incomplete information, which further investigation had corrected. Simultaneously, Earth would announce voluntary acceptance of the expansion moratorium and transparency measures. This would be framed as humanity demonstrating good faith and commitment to galactic stability. Both sides could claim success. The Council leader considered this approach. It might work, though some delegates would object. He asked what would happen if the Council could not reach consensus. If hardliners insisted on enforcing the ultimatum despite everything, Jack's expression became very serious. He stated clearly that Earth would fight if left no alternative. The cost would be terrible for everyone involved. But humans would not submit to unjust demands backed by threats of extinction. They had not survived as a species by surrendering when challenged. Thrax asked if Jack was personally prepared for war. The ambassador admitted that he desperately wanted peace. He had family on Earth, friends across the colonies. The thought of them dying in combat made him physically ill. But his personal feelings did not change Earth's position. The council leader made a gesture of respect. He stated that Jack Morrison had negotiated skillfully and honorably. Thrax would take these proposals back to the council with his personal recommendation for acceptance. He could not guarantee success, but he would argue forcefully for peace. Jack thanked Thrax for his willingness to seek compromise. He added that this crisis, despite its danger, had created opportunity. Both sides now understood each other better. That understanding could form the foundation for genuine partnership rather than mere coexistence. The meeting ended with both representatives standing and offering gestures of respect according to their respective cultures. They left through separate exits, each returning to their delegations to begin the difficult process of selling compromise to those who wanted absolute victory. Kate met Jack at the shuttle bay. She could see the exhaustion in his expression despite his attempts to hide it. She asked how it went. Jack summarized the conversation and the proposed resolution. Kate asked what he thought would happen next. The ambassador admitted he did not know. Thrax seemed sincere, but the council contained many voices. Some would see compromise as weakness. Others would recognize it as wisdom. The next council session would reveal which perspective prevailed. Over the 3 years passed after the crisis, the galaxy had settled into a new normal where humanity occupied a recognized place among established powers. The expansion moratorium proceeded smoothly, with Earth consolidating existing colonies and focusing on internal development rather than claiming new territories. Jack Morrison continued serving as senior ambassador, though his role had evolved. He spent less time in formal negotiations and more time mentoring younger diplomats who would carry forward the work of building lasting peace. One of his students was Chris Bradley, a recent graduate from Earth's Diplomatic Academy. Chris had requested assignment to Jack's staff specifically. He wanted to learn from the man who had faced down the Galactic Council and prevented war through calm negotiation. Jack accepted the young diplomat as his aide. Much as Kate Sullivan had served him during the crisis, the two stood in an observation lounge aboard the diplomatic station, watching ships from dozens of species come and go. Chris asked Jack about the events 3 years prior. He had studied the recordings and read the reports, but he wanted to hear the story from someone who had lived it. Jack smiled slightly and began explaining. The key to everything, he said, had been understanding that panic served no purpose. When Thrax issued the ultimatum, many people expected outrage or desperate pleading. Instead, calm confidence proved far more effective. Chris asked how Jack had maintained such composure when Earth faced potential extinction. The senior ambassador admitted that it had not been easy. Fear was natural and appropriate given the circumstances, but showing that fear would have signaled weakness and invited exploitation. More importantly, Jack continued, he had genuinely believed Earth could defend itself if necessary. Protocol Omega existed for exactly such situations. Humanity had prepared for worst-case scenarios, even while hoping they would never occur. That preparation allowed him to negotiate from a position of strength rather than desperation. The young diplomat wondered whether Jack had ever doubted the outcome. Could there have been a moment when war became inevitable, despite all efforts to prevent it? Jack acknowledged that uncertainty had existed throughout the crisis. Several times he thought negotiations might collapse completely. The turning point, Jack explained, was when Thrax chose to meet privately rather than maintain rigid public positions. That decision required courage from the council leader. He risked appearing weak by seeking compromise. Many in his position would have doubled down on threats rather than admitting mistakes. Chris observed that both Jack and Thrax had demonstrated wisdom during the crisis. Jack agreed, but noted that wisdom alone was insufficient. Timing, luck, and the support of reasonable voices on both sides had all contributed to peaceful resolution. Change any of those factors, and the outcome might have been very different. The conversation shifted to current diplomatic challenges. Relations between humanity and the Galactic Council had improved significantly, but tensions occasionally surfaced. Some species remained uncomfortable with human military strength. Others resented human economic competition in key markets. Jack pointed out that these were normal friction points in any relationship between powerful entities. The key was managing disagreements through established diplomatic channels rather than letting them escalate into existential conflicts. Both sides had learned from the crisis and developed better communication protocols. Chris asked about Protocol Omega. Was it still active? Jack confirmed that the emergency mobilization system remained in place. However, Earth had modified it based on lessons learned. The new version included additional verification steps to prevent accidental activation, while maintaining rapid response capability. Additionally, Jack explained Earth now participated in Council military exercises and peacekeeping operations. Human forces had proven invaluable in several anti-piracy campaigns. Their aggressive tactics and Deathworld resilience made them excellent at missions other species found too dangerous or difficult. These joint operations served multiple purposes. They built trust through shared experiences. They demonstrated human commitment to galactic security. And they provided practical benefits by making space safer for everyone. Several species that had initially opposed human expansion now requested human military assistance with their own security challenges. The young diplomat asked whether Jack worried about humans becoming too militaristic. Earth maintained enormous defensive forces compared to pre-crisis levels. Could that emphasis on military strength eventually change human culture in negative ways? Jack acknowledged the concern as valid. Maintaining large standing military forces did carry risks. However, he argued that humanity had always balanced martial capability with civilian governance. Earth's history included many examples of powerful militaries subordinate to democratic institutions. More importantly, Jack continued, the alternative was worse. Reducing military strength would invite exactly the kind of threats that had led to the crisis. Other species respected force even if they preferred diplomacy. Appearing weak encouraged aggression from those who might otherwise behave peacefully. Chris mentioned that some human colonies had begun developing distinct cultural identities. They saw themselves as separate from Earth in important ways. Did this fragmentation concern Jack? Could humanity remain unified across such vast distances? The senior ambassador had thought extensively about this question. He explained that unity did not require uniformity. The colonies would naturally develop their own characteristics based on local conditions and populations. This was healthy and expected, not a problem to be solved. What mattered was maintaining shared values and common institutions. As long as colonies and Earth agreed on fundamental principles like individual rights, peaceful dispute resolution, and collective defense, diversity in other areas actually strengthened humanity overall. Jack pointed out that Earth itself contained enormous cultural variety. Languages, religions, political systems, and social customs varied widely across the home planet. Yet humans had learned to cooperate despite these differences. The same principles would work across interstellar distances. The conversation turned to specific diplomatic situations Jack had handled recently. He described a border dispute between a human mining colony and a Tekran agricultural settlement. Both sides claimed the same asteroid field for different purposes. The situation could have escalated into violence. Instead, Jack facilitated negotiations that created a joint operation. The human miners extracted metals from the asteroids while the Tekran used processed waste materials for soil enrichment. Both sides benefited more from cooperation than competition. The settlement became a model for resolving similar disputes elsewhere. Chris asked how Jack approached such negotiations. What techniques or strategies proved most effective? The senior ambassador explained that listening was usually more important than talking. Each party in a dispute believed their position was justified. Understanding their reasoning was essential to finding solutions. Additionally, Jack emphasized the importance of addressing underlying concerns rather than surface positions. Often, parties demanded specific outcomes because they feared unstated consequences. Identifying and addressing those fears allowed creative solutions that Satisfied everyone's actual needs, the young diplomat asked about dealing with species very different from humans. Some aliens had completely alien psychology, communication styles, and value systems. How did Jack bridge such fundamental differences? The answer, Jack explained, was patience and humility. He never assumed human perspectives were universal. He studied other species extensively, learning their histories, their fears, and their hopes. This knowledge allowed him to frame proposals in terms that made sense within their worldviews. He also relied on skilled translators and cultural advisors. No single person could master every alien psychology, but teams of specialists could provide insights that prevented misunderstandings and identified common ground even across vast cultural divides. Chris mentioned that he felt intimidated by the prospect of representing humanity to species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years. How could young, inexperienced diplomats possibly compete with ancient civilizations? Jack laughed gently at the question. He pointed out that age brought both wisdom and rigidity. Long-established species often struggled to adapt when circumstances changed. Younger civilizations like humanity had fewer preconceptions and more flexibility. This provided advantages that balanced any deficit in experience. Furthermore, Jack added, every species faced the same basic challenges: securing resources, protecting their people, and finding meaning in existence. Human experience with those challenges, though brief in cosmic terms, was intense and relevant. Earth's harsh environment had taught lessons that gentler worlds never provided. The senior ambassador shared a story from early in his career. He had been negotiating a trade agreement with a species called the Volari, elegant beings who valued ceremony and tradition above all else. Jack had made several embarrassing mistakes in protocol that should have destroyed the negotiations. Instead, the Volari elder had praised Jack's authenticity. He explained that most diplomats followed protocol perfectly but insincerely. Jack's genuine efforts, despite errors, showed real respect. The Volari valued honest,